Thanks for tuning into this quick introduction to the History and Theory of Architecture program, or HTA as we call it for short. My name's Peter Kaufman, and I've been teaching in the program since 2010. When you're considering university programs, you have to ask a lot of questions. I'm going to try to answer a few of the most important ones for you now. First, what is HTA? In short, it's a place to study the history of architecture. That is, we study history, and the historical documents we're most concerned with are buildings. We look at how societies shape their architecture, and how architecture shapes societies, at how people use buildings, and how buildings affect people. This may seem a bit abstract, but in fact architecture, probably more than any other art, has a huge impact on all of us every single day. The architecture we look at spans centuries, millennia in fact, as well as cultures. The specializations of our faculty range from medieval to 20th century Canadian to Turkish architecture of the Ottoman Empire. Our courses cover everything from prehistoric tombs to postmodernism. Pretty much anything that's part of our built environment is fair game for us. It's wonderful material to study, but why would you want to study it so intensively, to major in it? Broadly speaking, there are two answers to that question. One is that you want to work in one of the professions for which HTA is ideal preparation. You want a career in the field. The other answer is that you want to acquire the kinds of skills you get when you do a degree like HTA. Let's look at the careers first. A lot of students come to HTA because they want to be architects. Now, to become an accredited architect, you ultimately need a master's degree in architecture, an M.Arch as it's called. Before you do that master's, you need an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree. That undergraduate degree can of course be a Bachelor of Architecture, but it can also be a Bachelor of Arts, a BA in a discipline like HTA. Not only is that a viable path, arguably it's an even better one, as it gives you a whole set of research and communication skills that you wouldn't get with a B.Arch. Doing a BA, followed by an M.Arch, gives you a really impressive arsenal of skills that will prepare you very well for the job market. More and more of our students are going into the urban planning field, and this is great news. Planners make a lot of critical decisions about our built environment, and to put it bluntly, most don't know nearly as much about architecture and history as they should. If the next generation of planners could all be HTA grads, our cities and towns could be better places, in my view. Many of our students decide to go into the heritage field, where they work on the management and maintenance of historic places. They may end up working for the government. Every level of government has heritage experts on staff. For example, Parks Canada is responsible for a huge number of heritage sites and properties across the country. Others work as independent heritage consultants or for private companies, including some architectural firms that specialize in managing or servicing historic properties. And there are other fields. Our students can become researchers, or teachers and scholars, or critics, or communications professionals, or go into any profession in which a well-trained mind is useful. Which segues perfectly to my second group of reasons why you might want to do an HTA degree. And that is because you want to acquire the skills that a good BA degree will teach you. It's a pretty long and impressive list, which includes critical thinking, analytical thinking, creative problem solving, connecting disparate data, visual literacy, historical literacy, intellectual flexibility, written, oral, visual communication. I could go on, but I think you get the idea. These are skills that will serve you very well in any profession, skills that become a crucial part of what you bring to the table every time you go to work. Master these, and you'll set yourself apart in just about any professional setting. So, if you decide to take HTA, what will the experience be like? What are our classes like? They range widely in size, from about 250 for our first-year surveys to about 15 or 20 for our fourth-year seminars. Some are lecture courses, Others revolve around class discussion. Most take place in the classroom, but some involve going out and looking at buildings together. In one of them, a fourth-year seminar, students create virtual exhibitions for an online museum of architecture in the Ottawa area. At the beginning of your degree, you'll take mostly introductory courses, and I want to give you a concrete sense of what they're like. Fortunately, because we've done so much online teaching lately, I don't have to give you a lecture simulation. I can show you an actual segment from an actual lecture in our first-year survey of architecture. This clip discusses classical architecture, that is, the architecture of Greece and Rome from about 2,000 years ago, and the principles that underlie it. Don't worry if you don't understand all the architectural terminology. Remember, this was made for students who already had several weeks of study behind them. But this clip will give you a taste of some of the kinds of issues we discuss in first year. The topic is the classical ideal of good design and the rules that governed it. Here's the clip. Hello again, welcome back. In the last video, we looked at the forms of classical architecture. To finish up this week, we're going to look at the principles of classicism, that is, the ideas and values that turn that collection of forms into a coherent, rational, and intelligible visual language. We're going to look at how to design a tetrastyle Doric temple according to Vitruvius. You already know what Doric means. Tetrastyle means that the main facade has 4 columns, as you see here. Vitruvius tells us in great detail how such a facade should be designed. Here's how it works. We start with a square. This is our module. Vitruvius says, this module once fixed, all the parts of the work are adjusted by means of calculations based upon it. In other words, it doesn't matter how big or small the square is. What matters is that the rest of the design flow from this module. So we start with the base, and Vitruvius tells us that it should be 27 units wide. We then place a column at either end of the base. Vitruvius says they should be 2 modules wide and 14 modules high. We then place 2 more columns between them, centered 8 modules apart. This leaves a space of 5.5 modules between them and the outer columns. And that gives us a wider intercolumniation in the middle, which emphasizes bilateral symmetry and leaves a space for an entrance. And this may remind you of what we spoke about earlier when we talked about intercolumniation and how tightly controlled and important it was meant to be. The capitals, he tells us, should take up 1 module worth of height at the top of each column. And they should be 2 1/6 modules wide. Then comes the architrave, which should stretch across the full width and be 1 module high. We then place a triglyph centrally above each column. The triglyph should be 1 module wide and 1.5 modules high. We then put 2 more such triglyphs, evenly spaced between each of the outer pairs of columns, and 3 more between the middle pair. The space between the triglyphs we fill in with squares 1.5 modules by 1.5 modules, and these are, of course, the metopes. And then we add the pediment. There's a formula for this too, but I don't want to bog you down in detail, and by now I imagine you probably get the point. The point being that the modest little square module is the basis for every major dimension in this facade. Let's bring back the drawing we started with of the facade. And as you can see, it fits perfectly. All of the forms, the stuff we looked at in the last lecture, the flutes, entablature, metopes, the works, they're all subservient to an arrangement determined by the square module and the rules of good design, as laid out by Vitruvius. So you have the stylobate, the columns, the capitals, the entablature, and so on that we associate with classicism. And you also have the proportions, the discipline, the intellectual precision and clarity that are also fundamental to classicism. And they're all in the iron grip of this little square. Or as Vitruvius put it, propriety is that perfection of style which comes when a work is authoritatively constructed on approved principles. And these principles make a difference. If you have the forms, but not the principles, the body, but not the soul, to make an analogy, you don't have a fully classical building. Here's an example. Let's keep our classical ideal in sight, and let's compare it to this building that's right here in Ottawa. No one would claim that this is classical. It's symmetrical, yes, but its proportions are broad and low. There's no sense of modular design. It's really just a modern two-story block. And simply sticking classical forms on this non-classical building wouldn't change that. It wouldn't make it truly classical. And we know that because, in fact, this building has those forms. And as you can see, it doesn't really work. The detailing is quite precise. You've got capitals with bases and somewhat Doric-like columns with abaci. You've got architrave, frieze, cornice. It's all there. All the details are there. But the proportions are all wrong. The intercolumniation is ridiculous by Vitruvian standards. This shows us that putting classical icing on a non-classical cake doesn't give us the real thing. Next week, we'll look at some of the iconic buildings from this era. See you then. So that's what one of our first-year intro course lectures might look like. We also have guest speakers come in from time to time, and lately we've been using a virtual equivalent of that by turning conversations with outside experts into podcasts. I want to play you an example from our second-year course on medieval architecture. In this clip, architectural historian Dr. James Cameron joins us from England in a freewheeling discussion about how Gothic architecture continued to be imaginatively reinvented long after the end of the Middle Ages, right up to the present day, in fact. Even though the Middle Ages ended, Gothic never went away completely. The 18th century gave us Gothic literature and the start of the Gothic revival in architecture. Both gathered a lot more steam in the 19th century and even continued into the 20th. In the late 20th century, we got the Goth subculture, its fashion, and its music. We even got a new musical genre, Gothabilly.
You got me crying like a child.
So, is the poor historian of architecture and art just left on the sidelines? Not a chance, thanks to Dr. James Cameron. Because to all of this he adds Space Fleet Ecclesiastica.
Well, actually, it comes from always an interest in comparing the sizes of buildings. If you scan all of the plans from a book like this, you can put them together and compare them with each other because they're all at the same scale. When I put them together, it's like, well, this is quite interesting as a wall chart thing. Why don't I just put them in space? And I gave as a title for it, Battle Fleet English Gothic. Now, this did go moderately viral. One particularly Gothic thing that young people encounter these days, millennials anyway, the Harry Potter series is interesting. They use locations in that film, like Gloucester's cloisters, Durham's cloisters, other parts of Durham Cathedral. Indeed, Durham is used on the model for Hogwarts. You can pretty much see all of Durham Cathedral in the miniature. The way those films actually did reinvent Gothic for a worldwide audience, from America to Japan and that where it's popular, I think is a fascinating sort of way that it continues to sort of spread that visual sort of idiom about even more.
So, There you have two examples taken from actual first and second year classes to give you a sense of what they're like. But I always say that a good education begins in the classroom, but it doesn't end there. So, what goes on besides classes? There are a lot of answers to this. As often as possible, and when we're not in the middle of a pandemic, we go on field trips to look at architecture in the Ottawa area. It's a great way to get to know the city, the region, your classmates, and your professors in an informal setting as we share our common passion for architecture. We also do everything we can to give our students a chance to study abroad. Not everyone can manage to do this, but for those who can, it's an unforgettable experience. We have agreements with several overseas universities that allow our students to spend a semester studying with them and their students to spend a semester with us in Ottawa. For HTA students, two particularly rewarding destinations for this have been Venice and Edinburgh, shown here. We also have shorter, more intensive courses offered by our own faculty during the spring or summer terms. On the left, you see a group of our students enjoying the sights of Rome, and on the right is a class that I took to England to study medieval architecture. These courses are very intensive and fairly short, usually 2 or 3 weeks, but count for a normal course credit. Another type of learning that's outside our usual classrooms is what we call the practicum. In a practicum, students spend 8 hours per week over 1 semester working in an institution or an organization related to what we study, and receive a course credit for doing so. It's a great way to see what it's actually like to work in this field, and to enlarge your network of contacts. HTA students have done practicum placements in places ranging from Parks Canada to local architectural firms. The articles on the screen were written by one of our practicum students for the magazine Canada's History. Not too many students get bylines in a respected national magazine, and she credits this project for landing her her first job right after graduation and launching her on a successful career. Incidentally, she now works in communications for an architectural firm that specializes in revitalization of heritage sites. There are also a huge number of campus clubs, societies, and organizations that you can become involved with. It's a great way to meet people who share your passions and interests and make lifelong friends. This is the logo of the Carleton Art History Undergraduate Society, in which HTA is always very well represented. They organize everything from social outings to career consultations. It's a great place to start getting to know your peers. So there's a start. HTA is a degree, but it's also an experience, a combination of the things you learn, the people you meet, and the places you go, the sum total of everything you can squeeze out of your time at university. If you ever have any questions, never hesitate to contact me or one of my colleagues or our admin staff. We're here to help, to teach you, and to open doors for you.